All right. So watch it. So here we are, the last night of Hanukkah, and we are, as always, dealing with the story of Yosef, although which part of the story of Yosef varies from one year to the next. But always we talk about the story of Yosef on Hanukkah. Actually, this year, the Torah reading of Miketz, which is what we're going to be looking at, starts on page 250 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash. It's Genesis chapter 41, starting chapter 41, and it goes through into chapter 44, in the middle of chapter 44. Just a little curiosity. This is one of the very rare occasions that Miketz is not being read on Hanukkah. Most of the time it's read on Hanukkah. And because it's read on Hanukkah, the Haftorah for Miketz, the official Haftorah for Miketz, is almost never read. So we're reading it this year. The last time we read it, I checked, I could be wrong, but I looked, the last time we read it was in the year 2000. So it's been 20 years since we read it. And Andy is very excited about this. And we're going to read it, hopefully, with a schedule, is that we're going to be reading it again in 2023. And then we're not going to read it again until 2040. So the vagaries of how the calendar works out make it so that the Haftorah for Miketz is almost never read, because instead it's preempted by the Haftorah for Hanukkah. So Hanukkah is 8 days, so there's always one Shabbos of Hanukkah, and sometimes, if the calendar works out a certain way, there are actually 2 Shabbatot of Hanukkah. So there are 2 designated Haftarot to read for Hanukkah, and they bump off whatever Parsha happens to be, the one schedule. So the Haftarah that almost never gets read is the classic story of the wisdom of Solomon, Chochmat Shlomo, with the 2 mothers and the live baby and the dead baby. Everybody is familiar with that story? Good. Okay. So that's actually the Haftorah that is pegged to our Torah reading. That's on 271. It begins, Vayikatz Shlomo, v'hinei chalom. Shlomo woke up and it was a dream. And that's the direct peg to our Torah reading. So, and just by coincidence, it's not the same word. I don't know. Our Torah reading is Miketz. Vayhi Miketz Shnatayim Shana. But we have actually that word, Vayikatz Paro in verse 4, chapter 41. So waking up is Vayikatz, and Miketz is at the end of. So we begin with the famous 2 dreams of Pharaoh, and then we go on from there to follow the trajectory of Yosef's career. And he is rescued from the dungeon, and he becomes second in command, viceroy of Egypt. And then, of course, when the 7 years of famine that he predicted based on Pharaoh's dreams, when they arrive, that famine spreads throughout the region, and that becomes the mechanism that brings his brothers to confront him. And the rest of the Torah reading gives us the ins and outs, the machinations, the manipulations that Yosef engineers at the expense of his brothers. And we end at the end of the Torah reading with the brothers really in hot water and not knowing exactly if they can get out of it. And I'm not going to give away the ending. And for that, you have to read the following Torah reading. Just one thing about this dreaming business. So of course we have at the beginning of the Torah reading the introduction of these two dreams, and dreams is a big motif, right? A very, very big motif in our story of Joseph, but also, starting from before that. So there are a lot of dreams in the book of Bereshit, in the entire book of Genesis. And a lot of people have dreams, and we have their descriptions. And the patriarch Jacob has a number of dreams that are pretty, at least one of them that's very, very significant, the latter dream. And then we get Joseph, and he has two dreams. And then we had last week also the chief butler and the chief baker. They have a dream each. That's another two dreams. And now we have Pharaoh has another two dreams. So there's a lot of dreams going on. One question to sort of pay attention to as we read, if we're going to read this, is there any special characteristic of the particular dreams that a person is dreaming? Is something different here than in the past, than what we're used to? So that's just one topic to look at. But as always, first thing is I open the floor. Does anybody have a particular part of our Torah reading that they want to focus on? Going once, twice, three times. Okay, that's it, too late. All right, I'll give you an extension. Another 5 seconds. No. Okay, good, that's it. So why don't we start from the beginning? And like I said, this is, one section that sets us up for Joseph. The other section of the Torah reading is the complicated stuff with the brothers. So we don't have that here yet. 250 is where we're at, chapter 41 in Genesis, verse 1. Would somebody please do us the honor of reading out loud for us? All right, Geraldine, thank you.
After 2 years' time, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, when out of the Nile there came up 7 cows, handsome and sturdy, and they grazed in the reed grass. But presently 7 other cows came up from the Nile close behind them, ugly and gaunt, and stood beside the cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, gaunt cows ate up the 7 handsome, sturdy cows, and Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamed a second time. 7 years of grain, solid and healthy, grew on a single stalk. But close behind them sprouted 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind, and the thin ears swallowed up the 7 solid and full ears. Then Pharaoh awoke. It was a dream. Next morning, his spirit was agitated, and he sent for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but none could interpret them for Pharaoh.
Okay, let's stop. Thank you. So, I'll exert my prerogative and put the question that I mentioned before right in front of us. We have here again a report of dreams. Is there anything different? And obviously it's a leading question. Is there anything different about this report of dreams? And clearly, no, this one has a ladder and this one has cows. That's not the difference. That's not in the nature of the dream. Is there a difference? Of course, and like I say, the answer, of course, is yes. Between this dream, this set of dreams, and dreams that we've had in the past. Sarita.
So one thing I'm noticing here is that this is a report about the dreams itself, as opposed to a report of somebody telling somebody else about the dream that they had.
Okay, so let's take that as a hypothesis, and let's test it. Let's test it by going to our famous ladder dream.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to look. That was the only one I was.
Okay, so let's look at that, and that's going to be on page. That's going to be on page 166.
That's why I didn't-
166. Okay. Geraldine, you got it? It's chapter, hold on a second. Some business is going on here. Right, it's chapter 28 in Genesis, and it starts at verse 10.
Okay.
But we can start from verse 12.
Okay. He had a dream. A stairway was set on the ground, and its tops reached to the sky, and angels of God were going up and down on it. And the Lord was standing beside him, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father, Abraham, and the God of Isaac. The ground on which you are lying, I will assign to you and to your offspring. Your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you and your descendants. Remember, I am with you. I will protect you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you.
One more verse.
Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is present in this place, and I did not know it.
Right. So that's the Vayikatz again. He awoke. Okay. So we have, I think, a kind of a parallel. One of the parallels that we've looked at when we looked at the Jacob dream, that we have between that dream and this Pharaoh dream, a similarity, which is lost in the translation, unfortunately, is the repetitious use of vihine, 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 which you have in the Jacob dream, and here as well, starting with verse 2, vihine min hayaor, verse 3, vihine sheva parot, etc., etc., etc. And then Vayishan, vihine, verse 5, etc. Verse 6, vihine sheva shibalim, etc. Right? And then finally, Vayikatz paro, vihine chalom. So vihine is clearly a favorite word of our narrator here. And it's never translated in a way that you can follow it as a repetitious motif. It's finessed by the translators. I would say that the word vihine, which we have also, as I said, again and again in the Jacob dream, vihine means look here. Oh my, wow, whoa. That's what vihine means. So vihine can be a marker of emphatic, effect of something that's being perceived, right? So that's what we have when we read this report of the dream in both cases, starting and I skipped one in verse 1, right? After 2 years' time, which we could talk about some other time, that translation, Ufaroch Choleim, Pharaoh's dreaming, V'hinei, Omeid HaYaor. Oh, look at that. So, and then he goes, oh, and look at that. There's these 7 things. Oh, and look at those other ones. Oh, and look at, there's like this, jolting again and again and again of what's happening in the dream to make us feel, like I say, the impact that this is something that's not just, a hoary biblical fable that we've all heard so many times. It's happening. You are there, and it's very, very intense. But I think, Sarita, that if we really looked at both of them, in terms of the criterion that you were suggesting, I don't think that there's a big difference.
No, not for those, for the other ones, yes, but not for this one.
Well, I would suggest that that may be not the case in some of the other ones too, but we don't have time to go through all of them. But even just using these two samples next to each other, we can see a really basic difference between the Jacob dream and the Pharaoh dream. So Alan, and then Michael, and then Audrey.
Jacob doesn't have a problem interpreting for himself. Pharaoh has a problem interpreting for himself, as do the two others. And on the Joseph dreams, no one actually comes out and says it. So the interpretation of them is different in each of the four. Is different in the four instances, or five instances rather.
So you're bringing up a very interesting factor, which is who says dreams have to be interpreted? We have a number of dreams, any number of dreams, I don't know how many, throughout the Torah that we've had already, where the issue of interpretation never comes up. It's never an issue.
Well, Jacob interprets it. He blurts out what he thinks it is.
Okay, so
and the others in a different way.
right. So interpretation seems to be a factor that becomes, of course, we had also the butler and the baker. So their interpretation has in that case, interpretation becomes an issue. We need somebody to interpret these dreams for us. So we've already had it. So in that case, Pharaoh's dream is not that different from with the butler and the baker, right?
Right.
So, but interpretation is an interesting factor that seems to start creeping in later on in the Torah. Okay, Michael.
One difference between the earlier dreams, Jacob's and Joseph's earlier dreams and the butler and baker's earlier dreams, is that the dreamer was always a subject within the dream. And in this one, there's no human. The dreamer doesn't appear.
Okay, let's hold on to that idea. Let's hold on to that perception. Okay, Audrey, what were you going to say?
What I was going to say is that in the dream, the earlier dream that Jacob had, God was speaking to Jacob. In the second dream, God has nothing to do with the dreams at all. It's just cows and scary cows and good cows. It's completely, its meaning is not obvious because God isn't there talking to the person who's dreaming.
All right, I think these pieces can start connecting up with each other. Harriet, yeah.
This one is doubled. This dream is doubled. And when I think back, it's doubled. When I think back, though, there's another one that's doubled, and that's Joseph's dream. And by the way, it also doesn't have any God in it. It's Joseph's dream, and I think it's a very nice sort of bookends.
And the butler and baker.
Well, I'm talking about Joseph's dream, with the stars and with
One person, one dreamer, two dreams, right?
Exactly.
But yeah, no, that's the fudging. That's the fudging that happens when you have with the butler and the baker. It's two dreams, but we have to get partners in there. But yes, the motif of two dreams, keeps on coming back, and we have an interesting opportunity, which I don't know if we're going to pursue completely. Well, maybe a little bit, right? Is there a big difference between the Joseph dreaming two dreams and Pharaoh dreaming two dreams? Let's come back to the two things that Michael and Audrey were pointing out. Mm-hmm. In the dreams, and not just the Jacob dream, but let's take the Jacob dream as typical. When a person is dreaming in the Torah, they're dreaming usually about some experience of theirs. They have something happening to them. It could be a communication. Very often it is. That's, God talks to you, right? Or something is happening to you. Somebody's got to maybe mute themselves. That's what I would also say is a big difference now with the Joseph dream. The Joseph dream, he dreams and he's in the center of his dream. He is the one who that stuff is happening to. The sheaves are bowing to him. The stars and the sun and the moon are bowing to him and circling around him. He is at the center of the dream. The difference here is that Pharaoh is watching the dream, but the action has nothing to do with him in any direct way. So this brings us back to interpretation also, right? When I feel I'm being communicated to, I may want to figure out what the communication is, or I may know that there's something here that's being told to me. With the Jacob story, it's explicit. Jacob is being told by God, I'm here to tell you that I love you and I'm going to take care of you and I'm going to protect you and everything's going to be okay, right? The thing that Jacob doesn't know is not an interpretation. He doesn't know that God is there. Wow, I didn't know that God was here. But that's a different story. With Joseph, the interpretation doesn't even have to be said, right? And everybody else takes it for granted that Joseph is communicating to them with these, symbols, his own conceited self-centeredness, right? There is no problem with the interpretation. And as I've suggested whenever it was last week, it ends up actually that's not the right interpretation. But everybody takes it for granted that they know the interpretation. Here, this is the paradox. What's the very first hine? The very first hine is in verse 1. After 2 years, Pharaoh dreams. Hine, omeid al hayor. Whoa, he's standing at the Nile, standing on the banks of the Nile. V'hinei. Now, the next v'hinei should be, and a big cow comes out and licks him in the face or bows down to him or gives him a glass of milk or whatever, I don't know. But his role in this dream is zero, except, and this comes back to Michael, he is in the dream, but he's not being acted upon, and he's not an actor except to be the viewer of the dream. What does he need to be in the dream for? Now, we have that sometimes, right? We see ourselves in our own dreams. So we know that we're kind of watching ourselves while we're dreaming. Sometimes that happens with people. But in this case, he's watching himself, but not really participating. And then he gets this bizarre scenario of cows eating each other up, and then the sheaves, the stalks eating each other up. What would have been lost if it would have said, okay, and Pharaoh dreamt a dream, and whoa, look at that, 7 fat cows came out of the Nile, and then 7 skinny cows came out of the Nile, and they ate them up, right? What would we have lost with no mention of Pharaoh at all? The answer seems to be nothing. Yes, Sarita.
So one of I think actually there is something there, and by comparing the Joseph dreams to Pharaoh's dreams. So Joseph, who is he? He's like one of the younger sons. Really should have no status, and yet his dream is about, oh, everyone's bowing down to me, right? I'm a high status. Here we have someone who is really high status, and you would think if he was dreaming, it would be something that reinforces his status. And the fact that he's in this dream and he doesn't control it, he's not in control, I think actually says a lot. It's, I guess, surprising that he's in that sense not in the second dream, not being in control, but I think the fact that these come together conveys to him, a sense of not being in control.
Okay, good. I think that's going to be very, very relevant as the interpretation starts coming out. Yeah, Alan, you wanted to say something?
I would just say that if he wasn't there witnessing it, and it was just kind of something that occurred in his mind, whatever, then it wouldn't have been as if this performance, if I could use that term, was done in his benefit. In other words, because he was a witness to it, as it was as if it was a message directed towards him and not something that was more amorphous.
But, you know, I just to push a little bit, every dreamer is the witness of their dream. You know, so he would have been the witness of the dream by just simply having the dream. So I don't know that that's such a heavy thing. Jen, okay, one more comment, Jen, and then let's read, because he's going to retell the dream. I don't want to spoil it, you know, the story too much. But yeah, Jen, what do you want to say?
I feel like in a way, the point, like Pharaoh doesn't need anybody to reinforce that he's Pharaoh unless there's some dynastic, you know, fight going on the side that we don't know about.
Yeah, and
But
I hate to tell you, there are some world leaders very powerful, and they need to be
I know,
constantly
but
reinforced that
that
they
might
are.
not, but without knowing anything else about this particular Pharaoh, we don't know that that's the case. We don't know if he's in a dynastic struggle. He might not, you know, he might actually be, he's the top, he doesn't need, what he's seeing is, and it's not about him because it's about it's about him as Egypt, not him solely as a person who needs to ascend to a throne or needs to gain power or needs reassurance that, you know, the gods are with him or something. This is like, you know, it seems to be much more about his nation, who he represents. So it's about everyone. So it's like much bigger than just him. And I mean, it turns out that Joseph's dreams are kind of bigger than just him also, but it had a much more narrow focus for Joseph's feelings personally, where Pharaoh, I mean, this Pharaoh seems, you know, okay so far. It's got some sacred meaning for him, I'm sure, because the Nile is right there. So in his religion, Nile, and there's a cow goddess, Hathor, I think, or whatever. So, I mean, there's probably some sacred imagery going on for him. But when you're talking about, you know, it doesn't have to reassure him personally as a leader or give him advice about where he's going in life. You know, his job is he's got a whole nation that relies on his rule. And, you know, so
I think you're hitting a lot of nails on the head with that. I think that if we're gonna let's read the rest of it. I think it's going to confirm a lot of what you're saying, and bring us exactly to this. You know, why this is not just a nice fairy tale about you know, the brash young prisoner who then becomes elevated, etc., etc., etc. There's some stuff going on here that is meaningful in that way. So let's look at verse 9, starting from verse 9. Geraldine, where are you? There you are.
Yeah, I just have a question that probably has nothing to do with what any of you said, and I see all of it. The trope marks for the word hine are different for every single one. Does that make any difference?
So that's a good question. I'm not going to give an answer. I don't have an answer that could do it, but just really quickly looking at a couple of them, it's interesting that sometimes the trope marks pause the hine, and sometimes the trope marks connect the hine to the next phrase. So for instance, in verse 2, the hine omeid al hayaor, so the hine stops, right? That's our first hine. Ooh, look, he's standing at the Nile, right? The next one is v'hinei min hayaor, right? That's a flow, right? Oh, and look, it's right from the Nile that such and such is happening, right? So that's the flow. But then verse 3, v'hinei, oh my goodness, right? And so you know, it keeps changing back and forth. I don't know that there's one particular theory about it, but that would be a nice thing to look at.
Well, it's kind of like, you know, if you think about an interjection like "oh," right? That can be, you know, the intonation can be so different and it conveys a different meaning. So by having a different trup each time this word is said, it gives a different nuance to the meaning.
Right. Or it's like Molly Bloom's yes. You know, you can say it a lot of different ways. Right. So, okay. So let's look at and let's see if there's more stuff. Okay. Verse 9. Go.
The chief cupbearer then spoke up and said to Pharaoh, I must make mention today of my offenses. Once Pharaoh was angry with his servants and placed me in custody in the house of the chief steward, together with the chief baker. We had dreams the same night,
Right.
and I, each of us, a dream with a meaning of its own. A Hebrew youth was there with us, a servant of the chief steward. And when we told him our dreams, he interpreted them for us, telling each of the meanings of his dream. And as he interpreted for us, so it came to pass. I was restored to my post, and the other was impaled. Thereupon Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was rushed from the dungeon. He had his hair cut and changed his clothes, and he appeared before Pharaoh.
It's like
And
this is coming out of quarantine and isolation. Right?
And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, but no one can interpret it. Now I have heard it said of you that for you to hear a dream is to tell its meaning. Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, not I, God will see to Pharaoh's welfare. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream I was standing on the bank of the Nile when out of the Nile came up 7 sturdy and well-formed cows.
So I just want to again point out in the Hebrew, the first one is hineni, which means hine ani. Here I am. Oh, look, there I am standing on the shore of the Nile, right? And then v'hinei min hayaor, the same trup actually. And look at that right out of the Nile, etc., etc., etc. Just really quickly, v'hinei, oh my goodness, here come the 7 cows, right? So, okay, let's keep reading. Go ahead.
All right. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream, I was standing on the bank of the Nile when out of the Nile came up 7 sturdy and well-formed cows and grazed in the reed grass. Presently, there followed them 7 other cows, scrawny, ill-formed, and emaciated. Never had I seen their likes for ugliness in all the land of Egypt. And the 7 lean and ugly cows ate up the first 7 cows, the sturdy ones. But when they had consumed them, one could not tell that they had consumed them, for they looked just as bad as before. And I awoke. In my other dream, I saw 7 ears of grain, full and healthy, growing on a single stalk. But right behind them sprouted 7 ears, shriveled, thin, and scorched by the east wind.
Right, v'hinei, 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 of course. Keep going.
And the thin ears swallowed the 7 healthy ears. I have told my magicians, but none has an explanation for me.
Okay, so it's pretty much the same story, right? There's one really striking interpolation that Pharaoh adds as he describes the dreams that he dreamt. If we look at verse 19, the end of that verse, you know, after that, what's it called? An ampersand or some, what's that dash? Never had I seen their likes for ugliness in all of the land of Egypt.
Oh, that's an M dash.
An M dash, thank you. So,
Egypt has really pretty cows.
yeah, well, it's all in the eyes of the beholder. And that's actually what he's saying. What he is bringing himself in this story, he can't help it, but he starts talking about his experience as the observer, his experience as the witness, that this really affected me when I saw these cows, right? So he's not just telling over the whole story, but he's telling it with that interjection of his personal testimony, his personal witnessing. And he again started with, let me tell you my dream. You know what's in my, you know how the dream started? With me standing on the banks of the Nile. Again, something that we could have dispensed with. He could have said, you know, I had this dream. Everybody knows it's Pharaoh who had the dream. I saw these 7 cows, etc., right? But he has to say that. He has to say that. So
He adds one other thing. He adds that that after the scrawny ones ate the sturdy ones, they look just as bad as before, and that's not in the original.
Right, that's not, so again, a vision, right, good. That's a visual report. This is what it looked like to me. I didn't see their bellies get full. I didn't see any of that. Right, very good. All right, so let's look now, let's continue with Joseph's response. Verse 25.
And Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told Pharaoh that what he is about to do.
So let's stop for a second. And let's go back to what we were making a distinction between the Jacob dream and the Pharaoh dream. And the clear distinction was that with Jacob, it's happening to him. God appears at the ladder. There's this celestial opening, warm-up act with the angels. And then there's God, and God starts talking to Jacob and tells Jacob exactly what's in store for him. Now we have Pharaoh, who can't get away from sensing that his presence in the dream needs to be told. He has to tell about himself being in the dream, but there's a very strange, thing about this dream. I'm in the dream, but nothing is happening to me. And I would say one more thing. I can't do anything about what's happening in the dream. What am I doing in this dream if the dream is just to show me this weird scenario? Why am I there? And that's the first thing that Joseph answers. The first thing that Joseph answers Pharaoh is, are you kidding? You are so important here. God is talking to you with these dreams. That's what's going on with these dreams, right? So besides the motif of God's, involvement in the whole Joseph story, which Joseph keeps on bringing up again and again and again, he's the only person who keeps saying that, and until maybe we get to the end, he is the one who's the commentator always. God is here. God is watching. Mrs. Potiphar, God is right here. I'm sorry. He's the God conscious person. But here he's applying it by saying to Pharaoh, you know why you're in there? Because God is choosing you to tell you something. Yeah, Sarita.
So I'm just, by implication then, if Pharaoh had, because he woke up and he didn't react to the dream, right? As if something was being told to him and he should know what it meant. And so he, by implication is that if he had sort of gotten it, he wouldn't have dreamed a second dream. The second dream is, hey, I've talked to you. Are you hearing me?
Don't you get it? Right. Okay. Maybe. That's not quite what Joseph says, right? He doesn't put any onus on Pharaoh.
No, but he does tell him it's the same thing, that it's a,
right. But he doesn't say, and you know why God told you twice? Because you're such a dolt that you didn't get it the first time, right? Can't you take a hint? He doesn't quite say that, right? He says something else. So, okay, let's continue reading. Geraldine, thank you.
The 7 healthy cows are 7 years, and the 7 healthy ears are 7 years. It is the same dream. The 7 lean and ugly cows that followed are 7 years, as are also the 7 empty ears, scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I have told Pharaoh. God has revealed to Pharaoh that what he is about to do. Immediately ahead are 7 years of great abundance in all the land of Egypt.
By the way, there's another hine. Go ahead.
After them will come 7 years of famine, and all the abundance in the land of Egypt will be forgotten. As the land is ravaged by famine, no trace of the abundance will be left in the land because of the famine thereafter, for it will be very severe. As for Pharaoh having had the same dream twice, it means that the matter has been determined by God and that God will soon carry it out.
Okay, so that's what Joseph says to Pharaoh about why there's 2 of them, because this is really, really urgent. It's happening right away. And God wants you to know this. Okay, so why does God want Pharaoh to know this? Jen, is that you raising your hand?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same. He's got Pharaoh has knowingly one nation on his hands and unknowingly a second budding nation. So I mean, he's responsible for all these lives. Why wouldn't God want him to know this?
But also
Well,
he wants him
that
to
I
do
want to unpack just for a second what you said, the responsibility part,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
That's, you're assuming that once Pharaoh knows this, Pharaoh will take responsibility, but that's a little bit, I think that's a leap, because what responsibility exactly is he supposed to take? These dreams are very, very strong. And what does Joseph even say? This is going to be devastating. This is determined, right? This is a decree from heaven. There's going to be all this plenty and everything. And then there's going to be such a miserable 7 years. People will forget that they ever had it any good.
Well,
Right?
at least it
And
tells him what he.
this is a done deal. God
Yeah.
is going to do this any second. So
Well, it
at
kind of
this-
tells him at least one thing, right? It tells him don't bother like with the repentance thing or begging gods to do something else or whatever. You can skip that part because this is, if it's definitely happening, then that's at least one avenue that's shut down. And then you can, I'm going to assume that however good or bad a Pharaoh is, he actually doesn't want to go through 7 years of this horrific famine that's coming.
So I think that one of the possibilities that Pharaoh could, deduce from this is, okay, during these 7 years, I better pad my Swiss bank account, and then get the hell out of here.
But then that's like saying,
like the Shah and like a zillion other,
yeah, but
autocrats
would God
who
bother giving this dream to Trump though? I mean, what would be the point?
well, but
That was part of the schmooze.
I don't know. I don't talk politics, actually.
Okay,
So,
well, would God, if that was his first reaction, I mean, from our view of God, why would God bother telling him then? Well, does he care so much about this one Pharaoh that he wants him to get away with this?
I'm just pushing because I want us to appreciate what we know is going to be the next step, but we shouldn't take it for granted, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
That this next step is, okay, Pharaoh, take responsibility for your people. This is a decree that you can humanly respond to change it, right? Not by repentance, but as Joseph then says, the famous stuff, okay, let's start, socking away some of the surplus, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is what exactly the next verse, right? Just one more verse.
Accordingly, let Pharaoh find man.
A man of discernment.
Wait a minute. Accordingly, let Pharaoh find a man of discernment and wisdom and set him over the land of Egypt.
And one more.
And let Pharaoh take steps to appoint overseers over the land and organize the land of Egypt.
Et cetera, et cetera, et
7
cetera.
years of plenty. Well,
Right.
Doesn't that automatically bring Joseph into the picture to do something?
Well, that, it could be, you could say cynically that he's being a little self-serving, but he's also saying it's all up to you, Pharaoh. It's up to you to do something now.
Isn't
And that's
Joseph
what I'm, and Jen, that's what you're saying also, but I'm just saying we should not think that that's automatic. Because
I think Joseph does though, doesn't he? Doesn't Joseph seem to think it's automatic? Hey, this is what you're going to want to do.
Joseph thinks it's automatic, but how many other, places in history do we have many rulers who don't think that that's automatic? That, people have led their people to ruin, throughout history. People have looked out for themselves throughout history. People have taken, oracles of doom as ineluctable, and that's all there is to it. Okay, so now we know that that's the way it is. Or, when somebody says so and so is going to be born, all the Shakespeare plays, which you know better than me, right? They're going to try to get around it somehow. They're not going to let it happen. Here, Joseph is saying this is going to happen. There's no way out. This is going to happen. Nevertheless, and this is not what is obvious. That's what I'm trying to claim. Nevertheless, Joseph is saying, and that, why are you in the dream? Why are you in this dream? You're in this dream because you can respond. Yes, Sarita.
So, but it's interesting because Joseph could have stopped after after verse 32, at least paused and let Pharaoh respond, and think about what it all meant, but he doesn't. He continues and tells him a course of action based on it. And so, I mean, we don't know why Joseph did that. Did he assume that Pharaoh wouldn't? I mean, and that if I don't tell him, he's not going to do it because Pharaoh's not the kind of person who would think about taking care of all these other people. I mean, but it is interesting that Joseph goes beyond just interpreting the dream.
Right. So, and let's appreciate that. This is not what he was asked to do. Right. This
And
was
he's a
not what
nobody. And
he
he's a
was
nobody.
hired to interpret.
Yeah.
Right. And this is another step beyond that. Yeah, Geraldine.
But repeatedly, Joseph says, it's not I who's interpreting the dream. God is interpreting the dream through me.
Right. So he's the mouthpiece of God. Is he the mouthpiece of God for the strategy of how to solve the problem?
Well,
Does he say, and God is now telling you to create cities of storage places and this, and that, and the other thing?
I think that he's just a visionary leader in this case. We have visionary leaders as well as autocrats. And I do want to take your point, Rabbi, that it is not a given that these two men would be on the same page about doing the right thing at all. So I just want to bookmark that in my mind, that's interesting, especially, and I'll say it, after, what we've been living
You said it,
through.
you said it.
And what we've been living through and the stunningness of it all, and that it goes on all over the world. It's not a given. It's not that people are going to pull it together and save everybody.
So I want to highlight on that point. This is a very, very good Pharaoh. This man, at least at this moment, what his previous, track record has been, we have zero information about. But
he does impale his servants. I mean, that is a negative. But
well, you don't know what that servant did.
I don't.
That servant, I don't want to go into it.
All
But,
right.
but yeah, so yeah, he is an autocrat. He's a pharaoh. He's an absolute ruler, and yet at this point, he jumps at this idea. Lou.
I think it's more than a comment on his ruling. I mean, pharaohs themselves were considered gods, and here is this god pharaoh accepting a deity higher than himself.
Interesting.
Okay. Right. Good. So we've got a giant step for humankind. Right? Very good. Let's read actually Pharaoh's response. 37.
okay. The plan pleased Pharaoh and all his courtiers. And Pharaoh said to his courtiers, could we find another like him, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is none so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my court, and by your command shall all my people be directed.
Okay. And that we'll skip the rest of it. But here is Pharaoh's very, very positive response. And I want to just point out that it's to Lou's point on 38, verse 38, where he says, "Hanimsa kaze ish asher ruach Elokim bo." Could we find another like him, a man in whom is the spirit of the Almighty God? It's not clear whether that's the translation, because the word Elohim also just means powerful. So, and that's how it gets to be God. It becomes the name for God because God is the all-powerful one, the Almighty. So Elohim can just mean mighty, powerful, strong. So Pharaoh could just simply be, in whether he's acknowledging this God that's above himself as a God, implicitly he is, because he hasn't contradicted, Joseph and said, wait a second, who are you talking about God? I'm God. But on the other hand, I just want to, be a little pedantic and say that translation, it could be that he's sort of playing along. He's taking Joseph's vocabulary and adopting it, as he does with the next line where he says, Ein navon v'chacham kabocha. That's what Joseph says, Ish navon v'chacham, verse 33. So there's nobody that meets those qualifications better than you. But the qualifications I want to now just point out for a second, the qualifications are not about dream interpretation, right? They're about wisdom and understanding. You've got some real wisdom and understanding. Okay, and just as a kind of a connection, the Haftorah that we almost never recite is the Haftorah of the wisdom of Solomon, right? And what is that wisdom of Solomon, right? What happens right before the Haftorah starts, the part where that's the dream, which we don't have in the Haftorah. It just starts with, oh, and Solomon woke up and it was a dream. In the dream, God talks to Solomon. So that's like one of the conventional kinds of biblical dreams. And God says, I'll be so good to you. What do you want? And Solomon says, I've got everything, but what I want is wisdom. He asks for wisdom. And that's what he gets from God. So when he wakes up, he's been imbued with this godly wisdom in a way that Joseph also is depicted in our Torah reading. And how does wisdom end up being actualized? How do you see that a person is wise? So the answer is in the Solomon story that you've got two women who are fighting over a baby, right? One of them had a baby, the other one had a baby, one of them died, one of them is alive. And now they're fighting over which one is the mother of the baby who was alive, which one is the mother of the baby who died. And they're both fighting that they both want the living baby. And they're both claiming to be the mother of that baby. What does Solomon, in his great wisdom, decide?
Cut it in half.
Cut them in half, right?
Split it,
Let's have a
share it.
compromise. A compromise.
Yeah,
share.
sure, that's fair.
Right. Since we have no way to figure out what happened that night, there's no way that we can do it. So we'll cut the baby. And then, of course, the real mother can't bear to think that her child will be put to death. And she's ready to give up. She's ready to give the child up. She's ready to give the child to the other woman just to save the life of that baby that she will never have ever again. Right? And let's turn to 272. It's 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 26.
But isn't he in fact letting the women make the decision?
Well, go ahead. Yeah, that's a good point. But he's certainly engineering it that they have to.
Right.
Okay, 26.
26. But the woman whose son was the live one pleaded with the king, for she was overcome with compassion for her son. Please, my lord, she cried, give her the live child, only don't kill it. The other insisted, it shall be neither yours nor mine. Cut it in two. Then the king spoke up, give the live child to her, he said, and do not put it to death. She is its mother.
So that's where wisdom comes in, right? To make life possible, to make it possible for someone who is in danger to save their life and get them to be able to be sustained. Later on, to give away a little secret, when the brothers finally find out that this is Joseph, what does Joseph say? Don't be upset. God sent me here to bring life to people. Ulhachyot am rav, to be able to make sure that a lot of people should live. That's the wisdom part. To use wisdom, not to figure out math problems, which is all very good, and we should have those kinds of things and so on. But here, that's the wisdom that's being celebrated. And Pharaoh gets it. To his great credit, Pharaoh gets it. You know what? And again, back to this point, let's not take it for granted, because in the end, people have constantly thought that the collateral damage of running a country, let thousands, hundreds, tens of thousands, let millions of people die, if that's what it takes for me to, to put down dissension or to just run things the way I want them to run. The decision here is almost a kind of a fairy tale fantasy, that the most powerful man in the world decides that it's his responsibility to save the lives of his people. The peasants, the most impoverished, the people who have nothing to eat. Yeah, Sarita. No, unmute.
Yeah, okay. So it strikes me, seeing the juxtaposition between this story and the Solomon story, is that, and this is to Jennifer's point before, that Pharaoh is really associating himself with his country and with his people. He's like that mother. I don't want my people to die. I want to do what it takes to keep my people alive and well. And
Exactly.
He's giving up power. He is giving up power to do that. I think it is incredibly remarkable as what he is willing to do here.
All right, we're going to stop here. Yashiko, oh, Jen, one last point, and that's it.
I just think this is not intentional in the Torah necessarily, but it does show, we don't have any indication, I don't think, that, Pharaoh is going to, convert and, et cetera. I think he's just got the general, pagan thing, like, there's a lot of gods out there, and he's certainly willing to listen to this one who can interpret his dream. And it's also a good view of paganism in that sense, that he's probably been raised to think of himself as, I am Egypt, and that's where his godhood comes from. And so in this case, in his case, at least, it is a really good interpretation of I am Egypt. And that's what, he doesn't want this famine to destroy it himself, etc. He's really invested in a good way. So apparently it never occurred to him to, run off to Switzerland or whatever. And,
All right, good. Yashikos to everybody. A happy last night of Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
Shabbat shalom.